Are you a leader, manager, entrepreneur, business owner, or knowledge worker? Are you leading people or wondering how to be a better leader in your own life and work? If you are, then you can be experimenting better. Welcome to The Experimental Leader, a podcast that takes a look at the ways leaders are experimenting in their own work. Hosted by Melanie Parrish, we dive into real-life conversations about how people might be using a scientist's mindset and experimenting in their work. Shift your leadership into something that works better. Join us on The Experimental Leader today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Parrish. It is so amazing to be with you on the Experimental Leader podcast today. It's great to be live. I love the wild ride of being live with you. And December and then into January in my world is just this really interesting time where I start to do wrap-ups with my clients about the year. I start to look forward into next year, which always has a sort of interesting this added effect where I start to do the same for my own life. So I start to think, oh, well, what was a part of this year for me and what do I want to have happen next year? So I'm super curious for you, what are you proud of that you did this year? And, what are your top 3 things that you're proud of that you did this year? And then what do you want to have happen next year? And I don't really just want you to answer like, what do you want to do next year? Because that's a thing and you can do a lot, but how do you want it to feel? How do you want it to feel different? How do you want it to, what do you want to call forth out of yourself? What do you want to call forth out of the world, the universe, your relationships? How do you want to show up differently? I know this year, one of the things I was really proud of is I got a little bored and I realized I wanted my friendships to be deeper. So I just started calling myself out to have more deep conversations in my life. And I think I did okay at that. As I'm leaving the end of the year here, I'm like, yeah, they got better when I started being a more active participant in my own life. And I also know that I want more hot springs in 2023. I've realized that I don't have to wait till hot springs appear. I can travel for them. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm also committing to 150 days of, I want it to be swimming, but I can't commit to always being able to swim when I travel. So I'm going to say 150 days of exercise. So what are you calling forth for your life in 2023? Not so much New Year's resolutions, just what do you want to order up? If you were in a restaurant and the restaurant, you could just order up 2023 to be what you wanted, what would you order up? And today I am super excited about our guest. Her name is Amy Eliza Wong, and she's the founder of Always on Purpose. She's a founder and author, a speaker, and a leadership coach. She's also a mom to 2 kids, a wife, and a busy entrepreneur. She's based in the California Bay Area, and her best-selling new book, Living on Purpose, was released in May 2022. I'm super excited to have you on my show.
Thanks, Melanie. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are doing book club on my show this year, which is always a little awkward right now. But I released my book in April of 2020, pandemic. And so this year, it was just a weird time to release a book. And so I've asked all my guests this year to sort of read a chapter. And this week, this month, we're reading chapter 3, How to Conduct an Experiment. And I always think this chapter is really funny because when I was writing the book, people were always like, well, it's about the experimental leader. So the experiment must be the most important part. And I don't actually think it is. I think the idea of experimenting is way more important. But I wanted to read just a little bit from the book, and then we're going to talk about it. Experimentation, on the other hand, identifies an end state, but has few opinions about exactly how that condition will be reached. Experimentation thinks about the coulds and maybes and possibilities and encourages people throughout the organization to see what they can contribute toward reaching that end state. Experimentation is dynamic and flexible and fosters the kinds of skills needed for a fast-paced, ever-changing environment. So I know you read this chapter. I'd love to hear like what came up for you. I know you work a lot around, innovative companies and people who are doing fast-paced, innovative things. What'd you notice for you, and where it intersects with what you do?
Yeah, well, it couldn't resonate more with everything that I stand for, everything I do, everything I focus on. And what you just read, I think, was so beautifully articulated in what it really means to experiment. You know, I have a saying, and I use it often, which is I'm always choosing momentum over certainty, because that's the creative process. And what you just described really is that it is the true creative process. It's almost an art and a science, right? And how we effectively create in the world in a way that's open and generative and nourishing versus stifled and constricted and it doesn't feel great. But what you described here is really the art of being able to say, okay, here's my North Star. It's what I'm shooting for. And now let's go for it. And let's iterate as we go. And as we iterate, it's this idea that I've got a North Star, but I'm not so attached to it that it can't shift. So as we get the data in the kind of the short term, we might adjust and shift that North Star. So I think, that right there, it's what you describe is a perfect description of what the real nourishing creative process is.
Well, and I don't know if you noticed this in coaching, but I've thought for a long time, like people come to me and they hire me because they mostly want something to happen.
Mhm.
It's like people don't come to hire me to maintain their status quo usually.
No.
And so they want something to happen,
Yeah.
and they're pretty sure they want it to happen really fast. And sometimes it does. I have a client like that right now where things are happening really fast. And I'm like, whoa, this is happening really fast. Because I also sort of have noticed over the years that sometimes the things happen, but the timeline isn't always as clear. Like you might be able to order it up from the universe and work toward it or have it happen, but sometimes you have to be patient or systematic, or it isn't always the timeline you think you want.
Mhm.
And so I just think that's so interesting. It's like you can have some certainty about what you want to have happen. And then are you willing to do what it takes to make that happen? And um,
Mhm.
I don't know. I love the uncertainty piece too.
Yeah.
And the time is often the uncertainty piece. Like how
Yeah.
long will it be?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, what you're speaking about is just such wisdom. We have this idea that we can predict what's going to happen, but I don't know where this comes from. Like, because we can never predict what's going to happen. I often reflect with clients. I'll say, okay, just take a look at your life right now. Go back 5 years. Now, did you think 5 years ago that you'd be here doing this? And there was like, no, not really. And so it's when we can uncouple and detangle ourselves from this idea that we're supposed to predict, we're supposed to accurately predict what's going to happen. The more we can detangle this idea, it's the more free we are to create, ideate, and to live into possibilities that are really nourishing. And I think that's the magic of really being on purpose and living on purpose. It's being open to possibility. But you can't be open to possibility when you're so rigidly following an idea of what you think you should be doing or what you think you actually want.
I have a question for you because
Mhm.
I sort of just I'm sort of working on the assumption, reading your bio and stuff, that you work with people who are similar to the people that I work with that are highly successful, that are working in highly successful companies. And I keep having this thought, and it's not a very well thought out thought, just so in case anybody thought I planned this conversation, I didn't. But I keep having this like thought about when people are like get frustrated in leadership. And I'm like, what's like, I keep thinking, like, what's that about? I don't think it's very useful. I don't think frustration is particularly useful. I think it takes up a lot of energy. I I think it often is around control. But I'm just wondering if you want to weigh into that, like what you see, what you've thought, um, anything you want to add, because I know you work around sort of fulfillment thoughts and, living on purpose, this idea of, I just wonder if you have any weigh in on frustration.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we could probably spend a whole day on this topic, and and it's really a broad question here. And so my first instinct is to like really dig into that, and it's like, well, what is it about the frustration that's interesting here, and what is it that is worth focusing on? And yeah, I mean, as humans, I mean, regardless if you're a leader or not, we get frustrated. That's just true. That's a very human experience. And if we narrow the conversation to frustration and leadership, I mean, do I feel that? Oh yeah. I mean, frustration, it's essentially it's a resistance to what is. So we've got a reality and then we push against it. The moment we push against it, that's frustration. And so, depending upon what, my client's real goals are, it's really going to depend. The conversation is going to be shaped by what those real goals are. Now, in truth, Melanie, and maybe this is true for you too, but when you take a big step back, when it comes down for everybody, at the end of the day, they just want to feel good. They want to feel free. They want to have inner peace. They want to feel good. They want to feel better than they do now. And I loved how you kicked off our talk here today asking about next year. And it was such a powerful question that not many people think to ask, but how do you want to feel in 2023? And that's so powerful because what we tend to forget as humans, particularly as ambitious and very professional, we got to achieve and we got so much to do. What we forget is that everything that we want, everything we think we want, it's actually not for the thing or the money or the status. It's because we think it's going to make us feel a certain way. And so if we're contending with frustration, that's generally going to be feeling we don't want. And where I generally take that conversation, or where it tends to unfold in a conversation, is recognizing that we're placing our power and our happiness in the conditions around us, thinking that if I can just move the pieces around in a certain way, I'll be free, I'll be happy, I'll be effective, I'll be, you name it. And so really the opportunity, there's usually a possibility or opportunity. It's like, well, what would it be like to be unconditional in your leadership, to be able to be with what is and not resist it, but to be able to work with it? Because frustration generally isn't a productive emotion. It's just eating up resources, keeping us from being creative.
I agree with you. And something that you said about that feeling question made me realize that setting an intention about how you want to feel in the future really is setting a target condition. And so you can work toward it without a clear plan. So it gives you that flexibility to work toward a target condition in a variety of ways without knowing how you're going to get there. But to hold the feeling of something as a target condition is a really interesting, sorry, it makes my little, you know, experiment like target condition brain really happy to
Yeah.
think that we
Yeah.
put feelings in there as the target condition.
Oh, I love that. I mean, because, it's oftentimes, unless you actually bring that in, if you don't, many of us work against ourselves. At the end of the day, many of us, I mean, I can't imagine any human out there that doesn't want to feel free and to feel good and to feel inner peace and to feel love and all of those things. And, so we all want that. But if we don't bring it into focus and we're not using that as our target condition, we go forth thinking it's in the thing, but it's oftentimes we're chasing the thing that forsakes the feeling. It's like, well, if I just get this promotion, and if I just do this, and if I just do this, and I just do this, and then we find ourselves with completely wonky work-life balances where we have, we're stretched, we've got this or that, and we're so far from this feeling of inner peace. And so until we actually bring that into the equation, like, what is it you want to feel? Often we can be working against ourselves, adding to more frustration. Yeah.
Well, and I often use joy as a barometer because if I'm exhausted, I can't get easily to joy,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't sustain it. And
Right.
so I don't have to worry so much about work-life balance, because if I'm wiped out, I'm not going to feel the joy. So it's a good measurement. It's like it keeps me honest.
Yeah.
If I can't get to joy, I better clean something up, because it's,
Yeah.
although I had a little period in my life this year where I had a really hard time getting there. And then it's like, wow, there's a lot of work to do to figure out what's keeping me from that.
Mm.
And it took finding a hot spring in New Mexico with a friend, and I was like, oh, there's the magic equation. I just have to go
Oh, no,
there.
I'm glad you brought this up. Yeah, joy. I mean, it truly, it is, I think it's the ultimate. It's the ultimate North Star, because I mean, it's just so life-giving. It's so life-giving. And um, it's when we're in that state of joy, that's when we're able to really truly innovate and create and connect with others and navigate powerfully. And there's so much goodness comes from that state of joy. And boy, do I hear you though. Like, I think it's just the creative process. It's the human process to go through these cycles. I mean, we all live in seasons, and there's there's the up season, and then there's the down season, as there's birth and then there's death, and so it's this idea that we can be in joy all the time, I think, is unreasonable. And when we find ourselves in those states when we're not, it's just recognizing that, oh, this is just the cultivation period. This is the winter. This is the winter season of my creativity. And so when we can be in those down states and not push against them, but just to honor it for that cultivation and the fertilization of what's coming, I think can be really helpful. But boy, do I hear you, Melanie. I was there too. Whew, boy, was I there near the end of this year. And I had to, my husband and I went off and did a phenomenal retreat in Sedona. Oh my gosh. And there I found my spring of joy again. So I hear you.
You know, it's like when you lose it and then you find it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like such a gift because I don't know. It's so interesting, that ebb and flow of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is kind of a superpower to be able to reliably find it time and time again as a coach for me, that I can find that and hold that for myself so that I can help clients look for it. Maybe that's the real heart of what I do as a coach, is just like perpetual hunting for joy.
I love that tagline, perpetual hunter of joy.
I know, but I think, is that it? Like, ultimately, like,
Awesome.
that's kind of it. I think some people, we never get there, but
Yeah.
we're always looking. And
Yeah.
it is interesting. So I want to know why you decided. I know what it takes to write a book.
Mm.
Living on Purpose.
Yeah.
Why was that the book you wrote?
Yeah. Well, I have been devoted to such at an early age. I mean, I'm just so fascinated with all things about the human condition, consciousness, existence, transcendence. I mean, really young. I've shared with folks that I found Thich Nhat Hanh in 5th grade and started meditating really young. And I've been so dedicated to the bigger questions about us, and like, what does it mean to truly thrive? And as you know, I happened into coaching. Coaching really found me in 2010, and it's just I am so fortunate. I really truly feel like I live a miracle every day, truly in my calling. And when I went off on this path and began working with folks after so many hundreds of conversations, and after my own research and my own self-study, it was becoming very, very clear that there are some pretty universal ways in which we hold ourselves back. We don't really realize it. And it has to do with how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to the world. And in the process of working with so many clients, I kind of was stumbling upon somewhat of a nonlinear process to take people through to really free themselves from false perception, free themselves from this conditional mindset of, oh, I just need to get this and this and this and this, what I call the hamster wheel that we're on. It's like, oh, if I just finally get that final set of proof, I'll finally be free, which everybody tends to be on. It's like, how do we free ourselves from that? And so in doing this work, it was around it was 2016 or 2015. I knew exactly what this book needed to be, but I also knew I wasn't ready to write it because I was still in the process of all the client stories and all the research. And the kicker, and truly the motive behind this really was coming from a lot of my clients saying, is there a book on what we're doing? Like, where can I go read more? And I'm like, it doesn't exist yet. And so the ask was so regular, and I'm like, and the desire, like, I don't want what we're doing here to be limited between me and the folks that I can actually work with. This needs to be available for everybody. And so I knew I was going to write it. And it wasn't until it was in 2016 when I was in my certification for conversational intelligence, which is all about the neuroscience of trust and communication and what does it take to be conversationally intelligent. And when I learned about the neuroscience of rejection, like the top blew off. That's when I knew, oh my gosh, the final piece of this that puts the whole thing together, I've got it. And so as soon as that solidified, it was, I'm like, this is it. I got it. But I also knew not time. And it wasn't until 2019 that I got the hit. And so for me, I only live off of inspiration. Like if it doesn't feel time, then I won't do it. I'm very tuned into, like, when does it feel this? When does it feel that? Which that hasn't always been the case for me. But in 2019, I got the hit, and I'm like, okay, now is the time. And then it was just, it almost as if it was almost effortless. Woo, and there we go. And so that's why, really, just because I had to get this out there, because it really helps people.
I'm totally curious about what you learned about rejection that changed everything for you.
Yeah. So all of us, so taking a step back, and maybe you see this with a lot of your clients, but there tend to be pretty familiar themes about the fears that we hold, right? So a lot of us tend to be afraid of failure. A lot of us tend to be afraid of, disappointing others, judgment, humiliation. A lot of us have a hard time public speaking. Like, there are all these things that seem kind of unrelated on the outset. But when you take a step back and you're like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, when it comes down to it, like, I'm really afraid of failure. And it's like, actually, sure. But what's going on here is humans, we have a wiring within us that truly, literally rejection is as triggering as the threat of death. Rejection registers as physical pain. Now you have to think, well, how and why is that the case? And when you look at a human, when we're born survival brain dominant, right? So the prefrontal cortex isn't developed yet. So we're born hardwired to survive. We're also born in this tiny, tiny helpless shape in order to fit through the birth canal, which necessarily makes us entirely helpless and dependent on caregiver. So when you put those facts together, that you're hardwired to survive and you need caregiver to survive, then naturally the brain is going to be programmed to know that, okay, life, sure, we want food, water, shelter, but hey, that ain't coming unless mom or dad buy in. So therefore, death to the human brain is rejection. And so that wiring exists really within us from the moment we were born to the day that we die. And that, when you think about it, it's like, whoa, that fundamental wiring really influences all aspects of our perception, how we perceive, how we navigate, because our brain is looking out for safety all the time. Environmental threats and social threats really are one and the same to the brain. And so unless we actually get, whoa, on a primal level, I'm hardwired to avoid rejection. Without us knowing that, we can be so hard on ourselves, like, oh, I was so, why is it so hard for me? Like, I don't want this judgment. I don't want to speak in front of people. Oh, I don't want to fail. Well, it all maps back to this fear of rejection. And so bringing that into the story of how and why it is that we navigate in the way that we do can be so eye-opening for folks. Yeah.
Well, and for, those of you listening to this podcast, if you are creating a brand and you remember what Amy has just said, this is so powerful for brands too, because, knowing that a brand will stand by you, knowing that, as a practitioner, I stand by my clients. I'm sure you do too. This fear is so ubiquitous. That it underlines so much decision making.
I feel like it's almost all of it. Yeah.
All of the decision making. When we talk about imposter syndrome, when we talk about, it lives in the minds of our top leaders. If you look at decisions that they make, often the sphere is right there. That's such an interesting description of it, though. I love that. Thank you for diving
Yeah,
to
of
that.
course, of course, of course. Yeah,
And
it's
how are
anything we can learn.
what's up for you in 2023? How are you experimenting in your life and work in 2023?
Yeah. Well, I just feel so I'm so, boy, I love the creative process. Now for me, and as I explained in Living on Purpose, I think one of the most powerful ways to create and facilitate flow for oneself. And I love the word flow. I focus on flow. And I love that's how you kicked off chapter 3 in your book, which was talking about flow. To me, that feeling of flow is so powerful. And what are the ways in which we can facilitate and create flow? Now, for me, it really is about following inspiration. What does not work for me is to say, okay, here's my 5-year plan and here's what I'm going to create in the world. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's what I want to be doing 5 years from now, but I do know what I want to do 3 months from now. I do know what I want to do next summer. And I only think as far as as it feels good. And so what currently at the moment, I feel so blessed to have been able to get this book out in the world and touch people's lives. And it feels like what's really coming is working with individuals in a bigger way. Because right now I work with a lot of companies, and I love that. I love working with leaders. I love working with companies, and there's also communities out there that that I really do want to also be working with. So I feel like working with folks in a kind of not I hate to say B2C because that just sounds so formal, but in a more it just in a bigger way I feel like that's what's really right. And what also really pulled on my heartstrings and moved me in a direction was I focus a lot on mindfulness meditation. It's a big part of my own personal practice. It's a part of the coaching that I do with folks because it's such a powerful agent for real change. It's waking up that awareness muscle so that we really can be in the driver's seat. So I've decided to dive into that in a really, really powerful way. And so going on a 2-year certification for mindfulness meditation teacher training to just not necessarily to go teach it, but to just really fill the toolbox, in full so that it really fully supports my clients and everything else I'm doing in the world. So that's what feels really, really nourishing. That's what I'm excited about.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
And where can people find you, Amy?
Yeah. So you find out lots more about me at my website, which is alwaysonpurpose.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, which is Amy Elisa Wong. You can easily go follow me there. And of course, if you want to check out Living on Purpose, it's available where all books are sold. Amazon's probably the greatest place to get it. The Audible's there, and I got to narrate, which was super fun. So if you're an audio book kind of person, then it might be a great option for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. It's been really a pleasure just talking about all things living on purpose. It's fantastic. If you're trying to figure out how you can use strategic intents, operational intents, and tactical intents in your own business, take a look at my book, The Experimental Leader. Be a new kind of boss to cultivate an organization of innovators. You can get a copy of that book for $4.95 at book.experimentalleader.com. I want to get this book in your hands so that you can start having a new relationship with your own leadership. It's been great being with you here today. And as the year comes to an end, I really want to challenge you to think about the flow in your life. I loved Amy's perspective on that, something I talk about all the time. Think about where the flow is constricted and where it's good, where the energy, the money, the light, the joy flows, and where it doesn't, and what the bottlenecks are, and how you can remove them to restore and optimize flow in the ways that you want to in your life for 2023. It's been great being here with you today. Go experiment.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Experimental Leader. We hope you have found value in today's episode because we're dedicated to helping you become the experimental leader you want to be. To access the show notes or learn more about working with Melanie, visit melanieparish.com. Go experiment.